and it is the afternoon, depending on our location, respectively. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Serhiy Hirik, who is a senior researcher at the State Research Institution Encyclopedia Press and a senior lecturer in the Jewish Studies program at the National University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. Dr. Hirik teaches courses on the history of Ukrainian Jews and the history of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. He works on topics concerned with the political history of Ukrainian Jews, especially on the fate of Jewish leftist political parties in Ukraine during the period immediately following the Great War. He also researches the politics of memory in post-Soviet states, as well as the features of contemporary anti-Semitic propaganda. And since 2020, Dr. Hirik has been the vice president of the Ukrainian Association for Jewish Studies. So please welcome Serhiy Hirik and his talk on Poale Zion under the Soviet rule, combining Zionism with communism. Dr. Hirik, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Svetlana, and greatly thanks to Indiana University for such a great opportunity to participate in this program, for generous support. My project. I will start, and I need to share my presentation. Oh, I can share. Okay. Can you see my presentation? No? Okay.
Yes, there it is.
Some interesting features distinguish the process of establishing Soviet rule in Ukraine and Belarus from similar processes in other regions of the former Russian Empire. For instance, a peculiar multi-party system that developed as a result of a number of splits in the main Ukrainian, Jewish, and Belarusian political forces played a much more important role in these countries than in Soviet Russia. An analysis of the history of inter-party relations during this period and various methods of political struggle used by both the Bolshevik Party and the groups that declared recognition of Soviet power, such parties were called Soviet parties. This analysis is necessary for an adequate understanding processes of the consolidation of the Bolshevik rule. In addition, this analysis can be useful for comparative research of similar processes in other republics, especially in Georgia. At the same time, the method of absorbing largest non-Bolshevik Soviet parties by the ruling Bolshevik Party was tested firstly in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian SSR, and later used in other republics, in particular in Soviet Belarus. I will start from the very beginning, from the moment when the peculiar multi-party system, Soviet multi-party system, so-called multi-party system, was created. The experience of the attempt to export Soviet power directly from Soviet Russia to Ukraine in January 1918 was accompanied with a wave of massive terror and ended with the signing of the Brest Peace and the retreat of the Red Guards from the Ukrainian People's Republic. But even during this period, the Bolsheviks cooperated with all the parties, primarily Ukrainian and Jewish parties on the territory which they controlled. After the first wave of terror, some representatives of these parties who stayed on the territory captured by the Bolsheviks declared their loyalty to the Soviet rule, and they started to adapt the activity to the new circumstances. Bolsheviks cooperated with other parties, but this cooperation yet did not play a decisive role in local political life during this time, during this the so-called first Soviet rule in Ukraine. In such circumstances, the need to change the strategy and tactics of political struggle in Ukraine became apparent for the Bolsheviks, and this was manifested in the admission of some former members of the Ukrainian Party of Socialist Revolutionaries, UPSR, and the left wing of the Ukrainian Social Democratic Labor Party, USDRP, to participate in the Taganrog meeting of the Bolsheviks of Ukraine on April 1918. And this meeting, it was decided to create the Communist Party Bolsheviks of Ukraine as a separate party separate from the Russian Communist Party. However, already in July 1918, at the first Congress of the Communist Party Bolsheviks of Ukraine in Moscow, this Congress was organized in Moscow because the Bolshevik Party was illegal in Ukraine. Then Ukraine was controlled by Skoropadsky Hetmanate. During the first Congress of the Communist Party Bolsheviks of Ukraine in Moscow in July 1918, a resolution on the attitude toward all the parties was approved, and this document strongly rejected the cooperation with local Ukrainian and Jewish parties. Only the establishment of working contacts was recommended. I will quote, "We need to establish the following basic principles of our relations with other parties. One, no cooperation with bourgeois parties, Mensheviks, Russian Socialist Revolutionaries, Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionaries, Ukrainian Social Democrats, Bundists, etc." So they didn't mention Poale, but they meant them, and a ruthless struggle against them. Second, establishing contacts with the parties expressing the interests of the small peasantry, subordinating their struggle to the actual leadership of the proletarian Communist Party. In view of this, the first Congress of the Communist Party of Ukraine resolves no agreements with the Socialist Revolutionaries, Mensheviks, Bundists, Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionaries, Ukrainian Social Democrats are permissible. But the Bolsheviks needed to take into account the real political situation when the position of their party as a party that worked underground was significantly undermined. And it also concerned the Jewish parties. Of course, only left-wing Jewish parties, primarily Bund and Poale. The possibility of cooperation with them was declared in a resolution, in a document called a resolution on cooperation with other parties, and this document was adopted on at the second Congress of the Communist Party Bolsheviks of Ukraine in October 1918, also in Moscow.
Dr. Hirik,
Yep.
I just wanted to ask, do you mean to be progressing your slides? We're only seeing one slide.
No, I will show other slides later.
Gotcha. Okay.
When after the initial part of my talk. Okay. An indispensable prerequisite for concluding agreements with these parties was their Sovietization. That is the recognition of the Soviet platform by these political forces. The resolution on relations with the so-called Soviet parties of Ukraine, adopted as a result of these debates, was less strong than a similar document approved by the first Congress. At the same time, the possibility of cooperation with the leaders of such groups on a permanent basis was denied even by the resolution of the second Congress. During the third Congress, of the Communist Party Bolsheviks of Ukraine in March 1919 in Kiev. The attitude toward other parties were even more hotly debated, and the resolution on this topic was adopted by only a small majority, 101 versus 93. The need for cooperation with the so-called Soviet parties was no longer questioned, but the nature of this cooperation was seen differently by different groups of delegates. The only Jewish party mentioned by the document was the left wing of Bund, not the Poale. And the resolution emphasized the need to coordinate Bolsheviks' actions with Bund. I need to know that this issue was not discussed during the debate. It was approved by delegates, but it was not discussed or it was not reflected in minutes of this Congress. But maybe there was a consensus among the Congress participants, because we don't see any discussion on this topic. The Congress called only two parties Soviet, in addition to the Bolsheviks themselves, the left wing of the Bund and the Borodbists, but this list was not closed. So they considered some other parties that were not mentioned as Soviet parties, and left wing of Poale among them. The last party forum of the Communist Party Bolsheviks of Ukraine that raised the issue of relations with other parties was the fourth party conference. It was held in March 1920. However, the report by Yakov Yakovlev Epstein did not mention Jewish parties at all. In fact, the left wing of the Bund, for example, was already absorbed by Bolshevik Party in Ukraine more than a half year before this Congress in summer of 1919. The leaders of the Bolsheviks in Ukraine, as well as the Bolsheviks in Belarus, did not consider this the issue of cooperation with the Jewish Communist Party Poale as significant enough to be discussed at the Congress, but they discussed this topic in party periodicals and on conferences of regional organizations of Bolshevik Party. This statement is also true if we will talk about the leaders of Russian Bolsheviks in Central and leaders of Communist International. For example, the Executive Committee of the Communist International discussed the request for accession of the two Poale parties. I will talk about both of them later. This topic was discussed only once at the Executive Committee of the Communist International on September 28, 1919, and sure, the application of both these parties was rejected, but the reason for this refusal was not even included in the minutes of the Executive Committee. The participants of the discussion just decided to inform representatives of these parties about their decision without any details. In contrast, when they discussed the application of two applications of the Borodbists party, they explained reasons of rejection of this application. A few months later, the attitude of the Comintern and the leaders of Russian Bolsheviks to both left-wing Poale groups, because left wing of Poale was divided into two separate parties. The attitude of the Comintern and the RCPB to both of them was formulated by Moisei Rafes, former member of the left wing of Bund. He wrote, in some areas of Soviet Russia, some Poale groups took the platform of the Soviet government, but this did not turn them into communists and did not affect their nationalist ideology at all. So, what the term Soviet Party meant in the political lexicon of this time, the Soviet Party, and we see from this quotation from Moisei Rafes that they considered both parties created after the split within the left wing of Poale as Soviet parties. The Soviet Party was a party that declared itself loyal to the Soviet government, and the party that was recognized as a loyal and legal by the Bolsheviks as a ruling party. And this status, this official status, gave the Soviet parties an opportunity to participate in elections to the Soviets on the ground. Those two wings of Poale, of the left wing of Poale, two parties created after the split within left wing of Poale, were the only Soviet parties that belonged to the Zionist political tradition. The left wing of the Poale was divided into two parties in the course of its political evolution in 1918-1919. The first of them almost immediately changed its name to the Jewish Communist Party. And the second one continued to use the old name of the Jewish Social Democratic Labor Party for several years. You can see on the slide the bulletin published in Kiev before the split within the left wing, but after the split within Poale. Poale divided into left and right wing in 1918. The right wing supported the Ukrainian People's Republic, the Directoria, and evacuated to Vinnytsia, then to Kamenets-Podilsky, was represented in Petlura's government, and the left wing stayed on the territory controlled by the Red forces. And but both right and left wing used the old name of this party, Jewish Social Democratic Labor Party, Poale, even in 1919. And now on this slide we can see that in July the split was not occurred, but in August, on August 31, 1919, the Denikins army from the south and the Petlura's army from the west took control over Kiev, and Soviet forces retreated to the north. And we see how it was reflected on the left wing of Poale. Some of the more moderate members of Poale remained in Ukraine, and especially in Kiev, and more radical activists evacuated with the Soviets, and those who retreated organized the so-called Gomel Conference of Poale Communists in Gomel in August. In August and September 1919. And this conference outlined the ideological positions of the new party after this second split within Poale. This Gomel conference did not proclaim the so-called Poale communists as a separate party. They didn't formulate the new name of this party. It was done a few months later when Soviet forces Soviet forces returned to Kiev. The resolutions of this conference were published in the first issue of the Central Committee organ of the newly founded group, the Moscow newspaper Nakануне, a day before, in December 1919, 4 months after the Gomel conference. But when the Ukrainian Bureau of the newly created party started to publish its own newspaper, Коммунистическое слово, the Communist Word, in November 1919, 1 month before the Central Committee in Moscow started publishing its newspaper, the Ukrainian main bureau of the Jewish Communist Party did not publish these documents. Formally, this was not a full-fledged newspaper. It was likely a newspaper format bulletin, and it was relatively small, and maybe That is why they did not publish large texts. And it's also likely that the full text of these documents were not available in Kiev as on November 1919. As you can see, both of those newspapers published by the Jewish Communist Party were published in Russian, not in Hebrew, or not in Yiddish. I'm sorry, but the Коммунистическое слово, the press body of the Ukrainian main bureau, published a short note that they print this bulletin in Russian because of technical reasons. You can see it under their logo. The body of the Central Committee did not publish such note. I need to say also that they changed the party slogan. Before the split, they used two party slogans. You can see them in right upper part of these documents. Proletarians of all nations unites, and Jewish proletarians of all countries unite. The Jewish Communist Party used only one of these slogans: proletarians of all nations unite. Absolutely deterritorialized slogan, and it underlined the extraterritoriality of this party. Okay. So the resolution of the Gomel Conference stated that the world was divided into two hostile camps. On the one hand, its authors saw the imperialist powers organized in the League of Nations, and on the other hand, they saw the countries in which the socialist revolution has won, and the countries in plural. But this document was adopted in the late August 1919, several weeks after the fall of Hungarian Soviet republics. So no one Soviet republic out of borders of the former Russian Empire existed when this document was approved. That is why we can conclude that this plural form countries was used to refer to the official independent Soviet republics of the former Russian Empire, and first of all, Soviet Ukraine and Soviet Russia. I need also mention that in these weeks, late August and early September 1919, the largest Ukrainian National Communist Party, the Party of Borodbists, proposed to the Communist International in Moscow, or in Petrograd, a draft constitution for the future World Federation of Soviet Republic. This document was marked by a clear desire to guarantee the rights of individual members of this association, the future Soviet republics. At the same time, the resolution on the political moment of the Gomel Conference condemned the creation of the so-called independent small national states. According to this document, such small independent national states were created only as a weapon in a struggle against revolutionary countries. States, the very word states, use it with the negative connotation as a weapon against revolutionary countries, not states. It should be noted that the Poale, as well as the Borodbit, the majority of Bolsheviks, the left wing of Ukrainian Social Democrats, and so on and so on, used the word state only with a negative connotation in their ideological texts. They used it only to denote the states considered as bourgeois. In contrast, they used only the words country or republic or people to denote Soviet republics, but not the word state. At the same time, the future Jewish Communist Party at the Gomel Conference, before this name was used, demanded to adapt the working class policy to economic conditions in a special way of life and an ethnic structure of each country. These demands are absolutely identical to the demands of Ukrainian Borodbists, declared in the draft constitution of the World Federation of Soviet Republics and in numerous polemical articles in their periodicals, especially on the topic of creating a Supreme Soviet of National Economy of Ukraine, Sovnarkhoz Ukraine, about Ukrainizing of educational system in Soviet Ukraine, etc. The attitude of Jewish Communist Party to the Soviet government and its attitude to the proletariat did not differ from the positions of other Soviet parties, but they were likely declaration of not the topic of real policy. Naturally, unlike the Ukrainian national communists, and in particular the Borodbists, Jewish Communist Party did not insist on creation of a separate Jewish Red Army, or even on creation of a separate Red Army in each Soviet Republic. The Borodbists insisted on the creation of the Ukrainian Red Army separate from the Russian Red Army. Until December 1919, when they, after the negotiations with the Bolsheviks, stopped insist in this issue. This position, it's interesting that this position of the Jewish Communist Party was, future Jewish Communist Party was similar to the positions of the Jewish Socialist parties in Central Rada in 1917-1918, when they did not support even the idea of creating Jewish self-defense units, and even in within the Ukrainian armed forces, even then when Ukrainian parties supported this idea. Some documents of this party, Jewish Communist Party, Poale, also revealed their plans for the so-called agrarianization of Jews from the shtetls. They called to involve artisans who have been pushed out from economic life in productive activity and to include them in agriculture and in industries related to agriculture. This idea was also formulated in an article by Benzion Rubinstein, article toward the problem of the Jewish masses agrarianization. The first part of this article was published in the same issue of Nakanune as all the resolutions of the General Conference. The next document, the resolution on the nationality question of the Gomel Conference, was penned by Comrade Sholom. The real name of this activist is not mentioned in any documents. This is the main ideological texts on this subject, nationality question, published by the Jewish Communist Party until its dissolution in 1922-23. So the case statements of this document are: first, building the so-called workers' nations on the base of proletarians of each ethnic group. Second, advocating the thesis of the auxiliary role of the personal principle of solving the nationality question, along with the territorial principle as the main one in capitalist society. And the auxiliary nature of the territorial principle compared to the personal principle as the main in socialist society. So the situation, according to them, the situation changed after the socialist reconstruction in nationality question started, and the territorial principle became auxiliary, and the personal extraterritorial principle became the main principle. Fourth, the next point of the document is the idea of centralizing economic life and decentralizing of cultural creativity. It was contrasted to the Ukrainian national communists. Ukrainian national communists called to decentralizing both economic life and cultural creativity. It's quite close to this idea of centralizing economic life and decentralizing cultural creativity is quite close to the future official doctrine in the Soviet Union, official doctrine of national cultures in the USSR as national in form and socialist in content. This doctrine was proclaimed by Joseph Stalin in 1925. Fifth, the struggle for Soviet power is necessary for genuine national liberation. Declaring this thesis, Sholem specifically cited the example of Ukraine. Sixth, in the early stages of the so-called socialist reconstruction, national autonomy, both territorial and personal, is necessary as a mean against national neglect. According to this document, after the socialist revolution, national discrimination will become impossible, but this discrimination may be replaced by the so-called national neglect, национальное игнорирование. Seventh, national autonomy of Jews in the early stages of socialist reconstruction could be embodied through Jewish sections within executive authorities, which will later to be reorganized into Jewish Workers' Council. So they proposed the creation of the bodies of power of the future national personal Jewish autonomy. This idea was taken from the laws on Jewish of national personal autonomy that were adopted by Central Rada in January 1918. The last point of this document, the Jewish autonomous bodies have to be responsible for culture, education, healthcare, social assistance, agrarianization, and productivization of Jews, and immigration, Jewish immigration. In 1919, the ideologists of the Jewish Communist Party did not declare complete rejections of Zionist ideas, but they significantly rethought these ideas. The Gomel Conference adopted a special resolution on our Palestinian activities, and this document stated that the economic situation of Jews in the lands where the working class has taken power had not radically changed. At the same time, the development of revolutionary events and the civil war, they used this term, led to the impoverishment of Jews and made it impossible to continue their traditional economic activities. This situation made the policy of productivization and agrarianization of Jews necessary. However, large-scale activities of this type are not possible in the diaspora, so the Jewish autonomous authorities in the future must, I quote, concentrate the masses of Jewish emigres in the only country Jewish immigration to which has been in general successful, and where the creation of a Jewish population with a complete and normal social structure is possible. We mean Palestine. This document emphasizes that this process was to be carried out under the control of the Third International, the Communist International, Comintern, but they proposed it, as the Halutzim had done during the previous era, before the revolution, to start agrarianize Jews in the diaspora to prepare them for the work on the land in Palestine. In contrast, I told this already. At the end of August 1919, the Moscow conference of this party took place, and it adopted the resolution on the World Jewish Communist Party. On the World Jewish Communist Party. This document asserted that during the revolution, the Jewish proletariat of all countries, both capitalist countries and socialist countries, was in the same economic and political situation. And I need to underline that this thesis fundamentally contradicted to the official views of the ruling Bolshevik party then. In addition, this resolution on the World Jewish Communist Party emphasized that the main task of all Jewish communist groups in the world was to create a socialist society in Palestine. They used the term society, not state, not even republic, but the Jewish socialist society in Palestine. According to this document, the Jewish communists in all the countries where they existed had to create a World Jewish Communist Party to coordinate these attempts for creating Jewish socialist society in Palestine. In 1920, this organization was created, but it was called the World Communist Verband Koalition, Weltverband Koalition. And it was created without any both Jewish Communist Party Coalition and the Jewish Social Democratic Labor Party Coalition on the Soviet-controlled areas did not participate in the creating of this World Communist Verband Coalition, but this organization cooperated with both of these parties during the first years of its existence. All of these theses were repeated in the declaration of the Jewish Communist Party Coalition in September 1919, and only in September 1919 the official name of this party was used for the first time. I will finish soon. Okay. The Jewish Communist Party Coalition had a decentralized structure. They had the Central Committee in Moscow and the main Central Bureau in Kyiv and the Central Bureau in Minsk. They published two newspapers, Накануне in Moscow and Коммунистическое слово in Kyiv, and later the Communist Thought, der kommunistische Gedanke in Moscow, and but the majority of members of this party was concentrated in Ukraine and Belarus, not in Moscow. The Central Committee existed in Moscow, but there were not a lot of members of this party in Moscow or in other internal governorates of the former Russian Empire near the central of South Russia, because there were not a lot of Jews in these regions. Okay, but the Jewish Communist Party was the only Jewish party that was open to the cooperation with non-Jewish parties. For example, the Ukrainian bureau of this party has declared in its first circular to all party organizations to desire to cooperate in Ukraine with three parties: the Borodbists, the Bolsheviks, and the Borbists. The Borbists, the left wing of the Ukrainian Party of Socialist Revolution, or the Borbists, the left wing of territorially Ukrainian organization of all Russian Party of Socialist Revolutionaries and Bolsheviks. And in January 1920, the Central Committee of this party in Moscow issued the new document and mentioned only the Ukrainian Borodbists as possible partners. they wrote, in the course of political work in recent years, we have noted a significant rapprochement with the Borodbists, caused by the close ideological positions of both fraternal communist parties. The Central Committee proposes to its Ukrainian Central Bureau to start negotiation with the leaders of the Ukrainian Communist Party Borodbists on the further development of this rapprochement at the center and on the ground. The leaders of the Ukrainian Central Bureau of Jewish Communist Party published a number of sympathetic articles about the Borodbists in their press. The Borodbists did the same in their main newspaper, Borodba in Kyiv, and I'm sorry, I forgot. Proletarska Pravda, the Proletarian Truth in Kharkiv, and one of the leaders of Jewish Communist Party, Yakov Yashin, gave several lectures on the ideology of Jewish communists in Borodbist clubs, and he even changed his last name for when giving these lectures. He gave these lectures as Yakov Yashko, not as Yakov Yashin. Members of the Borodbist Central Committee, Alexander Shumsky and Mikhailo Polos, gave several lectures on their party in Borodbist Borokhov clubs named after Bar Borokhov, main ideologist of Poale. But this cooperation ended in March 1920 when Borodbists intensified their negotiations on merging with Bolsheviks. After the Borodbists were absorbed by the Bolsheviks, the Jewish Communist Party lost the only natural ally in Soviet Ukraine. This party had attempted to apply for membership in Third International. I mentioned it before, and of course this attempt was unsuccessful. I'm sorry, I will turn on light. After 1920, they found themselves in political isolation, and any cooperation of Jewish Communist Party with the ruling party, Bolsheviks party, was strictly limited. In 1921, the World Communist Verband, the Weltverband Koalition, was allowed to work in the Third Congress of the Comintern, but it was not admitted to the Third International. But the delegates both of Jewish Communist Party and the Jewish Social Democratic Labor Party Coalition were not allowed to participate in this Congress, even with an advisory vote. In 1922, the Jewish Communist Party was in deep crisis, and when it became so isolated, it started negotiations with the Bolsheviks, and it was dissolved during the 1922-1923, and its members in some regional organizations adopted to the Bolshevik organizations, to the Jewish sections of Bolshevik organizations, and later worked there. In 1921, immediately after conversion of Zvi Friedland to Bolshevism, he was one of the leaders of Jewish Communist Party Coalition in Belarus. Zvi Friedland, his real name is Grigory Friedland. In 1920s, 1930s, became a well-known Marxist historian, specialist in French Revolution, and first dean of the history department in Moscow State University after this department was restored in 1934. So in 1921, but he was a young political activist in Minsk, he published the pamphlet Communist International and Communist Coalitionism. It was interesting account from the within, and Zvi Friedland described the crisis within the Jewish Communist Party Poale from the point of view of a participant of this process. And this text is addressed primarily to Poale. It's full of the insider information, and at the same time, as you can see, it was written and published in Russian. I will mention that it's extremely rare book, and I didn't find it in catalogs or in Devizu, in any Ukrainian, Russian, Belarusian, or American and Israeli libraries. This copy is the only known to me copy, and it's in my private collection. In December 1922, this party was officially dissolved, and during the next months, its local organization were absorbed to the Jewish sections of the Bolshevik party. So the existence of this faction was over, and I will finish in a few minutes. Okay, another Jewish communist group existed as a Soviet party until 1928, and it was the very last non-Bolshevik legal party in the Soviet Union. And unlike the Jewish Communist Party, it paid much more attention to the Aliyah issues, to the issues of Jewish immigration. In general, its activists were more interested in Palestine, and even its official press body, Еврейская пролетарская мысль, later it was published in Yiddish as Der Jiddische Proletarische Gedanke, contained a separate section, Palestine Department, Палестинский отдел. No one of such documents was published in the newspapers of Jewish Communist Party. Okay, and several words about this party. As I told, it existed until 1928, so even longer than the Ukrainian Communist Party, UCP, UKPiste, that were dissolved in 1925. And they had their own they had their own publishing house, Molot or Hammer in Yiddish. They published both books in Russian and in Yiddish. Their own printing house, and their only one magazine, Еврейская пролетарская мысль. It was published firstly in Kyiv, then in Kharkiv, and since 1921 in Moscow. But this party was very small, about several thousand members all over the Soviet Union. The majority of its members were intelligentsia, doctors, Jewish teachers, economists, accountants, and so on. For example, this party was dissolved in 1928. Its members were not arrested then, but both leaders of this party, Lev Berlinraut and Solomon Kivin or Solomon Kapelush, were arrested in 1937 and executed in 1938. And the history of this attempt to create the Zionist communism was over. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Serhiy. We have about 8 minutes for questions and discussions. So colleagues, please. Yes, Pani Nadia, the floor is yours. Serhiy, maybe you could stop sharing your presentation so we can see one another better. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Serhiy. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask you, can we assert that Russian Bolsheviks were used the different parties, Jewish and Ukrainian parties, as many other cultural figures, to establish their power and then bend them? Because as I when I remember correctly, the Poale was liquidated in 1928 or 1929. Yes, so they used them and
28,
then
yeah.
banned them. And second short question, I was intrigued by these expressions about publishing коммунистическое слово in Russian for technical reasons. What do you think? What technical reasons could it be for printing this newspaper in Russian? Did they try to please the Russian Bolsheviks, or just they have another approach? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nadia. Sure, Bolsheviks used members of Ukrainian, Jewish, and Belarusian National Communist Party to establish their rule, and but they used only those activists of these parties who joined the ruling party. When the JCP, the Jewish Communist Party, was dissolved, its members became active members of the Bolshevik Party in 1923. First Jewish National Communist Party. When the left-wing of Bund, Коммунистический Bund, Kombund, was dissolved in 1920 in Ukraine in 1919, and in 1920 in Belarus, its leaders became Bolsheviks. And Moisei Rafis, one of the leading Jewish political author in Bolshevik Party since 1920, he was one of the Bundist leaders until 1920. They also used the Ukrainian National Communists, especially the Borodbis leaders, but the Borodbis leaders were adopted to the Bolshevik Party, and some of them even became members of the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party in 1920, Vasily Lamplakitny and Alexander Shumsky. And that is why Bolsheviks tried to use them even before those parties were absorbed. And that is why already in 1919 they allowed Borodbis, for example, Borodbis to join to the to Radnarkom, the Council of People Commissars, the government of Soviet Ukraine. They gave them firstly 2 of them, then 3 ministerial posts, the positions of Minister of Justice, Minister of Finances, and Minister of Education. And they used former Bundists and former Yekapists in Jewish sections, Yevsekti of the Bolshevik Party. But those Poale who didn't join to the Bolshevik Party cannot be used, because they were representatives of the so-called hostile party, officially legal, officially loyal, but they were not those on whom Bolsheviks could whom they really Bolsheviks really consider it as loyal. Thanks.
Svetlana, please.
Thank you, Serhiy, for this informative and very detailed presentation. And I have to admit that I didn't know anything about this topic before your presentation. So, but I have noticed the documents you have been using actually in your research, or at least the ones you have demonstrated just to us, they used mostly the Russian language, and I would like to follow up Nadia's presentation. I have also noticed this technical reason. So
Yeah.
you mentioned «Коммунистическое слово» in Kiev, that was published in Russian, «Еврейская пролетарская мысль», that was published in Russian. So could you please elaborate a bit more on the language situation, why all those papers were, or newspapers were published in Russian? What was the linguistic situation in the party in general, in the probably the documents they were publishing? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Svetlana. I'm sorry, I forgot about the second question of Nadia. Thank you that you repeated it. The technical reasons was simple. They simply didn't have Jewish script in the printing office. They used Cyrillic script, and in the documents in archives, about more than half the documents were written in Yiddish, but of course, majority of the target audience in Ukraine were Yiddish-speaking community, and they addressed this note to this community to trying to say that they didn't want to publish in Russian, but they do it because they don't have Jewish script. And in Moscow, situation was another. In Moscow, the target audience was mostly Russified, assimilated, and Jewish workers, Jewish intelligentsia in Moscow frequently couldn't read serious texts in Yiddish. They could use Yiddish in personal communications, but they didn't read serious political texts in Yiddish. And that is why the press body of the Central Committee was published in Russian. Еврейская пролетарская мысль newspaper, the press body of the other coalition party, was published both in some issues were published in Russian, some in Yiddish during the first years. Then after its editorial moved to Moscow, they publish it only in Russian. And during the last 2 years of the existence of this magazine in 1926-28, I do not know why, but they started publishing it only in Yiddish. And even more, in 1926, the documents of this party, the internal documents of this party, they preserved in the Central Party archive. I used them before the war, in 2012. The internal documents of the Central Committee of this party, they were written in Russian before 1926, only in Russian. But in 1926-28, all of them are written in Yiddish.
Ukrainian, right? No Ukrainian at all.
No Ukrainian at all. But some documents in of the Central Committee of Ukrainian main committee, Ukrainian main bureau of this party in 1919-1920 were written in Ukrainian, especially the letters to board-based Central Committee and the internal documents about their contacts with the board-based.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Serhiy.
Thank you, Serhiy. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We really appreciate you sharing your insights with us, and do hope that you will all take care. We got the note that there's an air raid alert.